My name is Delia Marsh. I am 34 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in March, 11 days before I was supposed to close on my first home, a woman I had not spoken to in over 2 years slid a manila folder across a kitchen table and said to me, in a voice as flat as a dial tone, "You already signed this, whether you remember it or not." I looked at the signature on the third page. It had my name on it. It was not my handwriting. The date on that line said September 14th, a Thursday, when I had been 400 miles away, attending a conference in Nashville, my badge lanyard still in the bottom of a tote bag I hadn't unpacked. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not reach for the folder or fling it across the room. I set my coffee mug down on the table. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at my mother, and I said, "Okay." What she did not know, what neither she nor my sister Vanessa had any way of knowing, was that the loan officer who had processed that application 8 months earlier was a woman named Priya Subramanian. And Priya Subramanian had been my college roommate for 3 years at Ohio State. She had been at my side through 2 breakups and 1 hospitalization and a semester where I barely ate. She had my number saved under Dell, my person. And she had called me from a blocked line the night that application cleared, not to process it, but to warn me. I had been collecting every piece of paper since that phone call. If this story is already settling somewhere uncomfortable in your chest, if you've ever had someone use your name like a blank check, please hit that like button and subscribe. We're building something here, a community of people who refuse to stay buried. And before we go any further, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I mean that. I love knowing where in the world these stories land. Are you listening at midnight in Lagos, 8 in the morning in Manchester, on a lunch break in Calgary, 3 in the afternoon in Auckland? Tell me, you matter to this. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because the forgery was not where the story started. Not even close. I'm Delia Marsh. And this is the story of how my mother spent 11 years treating my identity as a resource she owned, and how a phone call from a woman who once shared a twin bed with me during a snowstorm became the document that ended it. Let me take you back to 2009. I was 22 years old, and my sister Vanessa was 19, and our father had just died. His name was Gerald Marsh. He was a quiet man, a civil engineer who kept a collection of mechanical pencils and a ceramic mug on his desk, and made us both grilled cheese on Sunday mornings with the crusts cut off until we were embarrassingly old. He coached my soccer team for 1 season when I was 9, even though he admitted freely that he did not understand the offside rule. He drove Vanessa to her piano lessons every Tuesday for 6 years without ever complaining about the traffic on Route 3. He was the kind of father who showed up. Reliably, without fanfare, without needing to be asked twice. He died on a Wednesday in November of a second heart attack, the kind that doesn't give you any warning. I was at work when my mother called. I remember the fluorescent light in the break room. I remember the way the vending machine hummed. I remember putting my phone in my pocket and standing there for a moment with nowhere to go, and then walking back to my desk because I didn't know what else to do with my body. We buried him in a dark gray suit he'd worn to Vanessa's high school graduation. The will was read 3 weeks later at the office of an attorney named Howard Pelletier in a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. My mother sat on one side of the conference table. Vanessa sat next to her. I sat across from them both, which felt, even then, like an arrangement that meant something. The house, a 4-bedroom colonial on Clover Hill Drive in Westerville, Ohio, was left jointly to my mother, Barbara Marsh, and to me, as the eldest child. Not to Vanessa, to me. My father had his reasons, and he had explained them privately once in a letter I found inside a walnut box in his desk drawer the day after the funeral. He wrote that he trusted my judgment, that he worried about Barbara's relationship with money, her tendency to make decisions from a place of anxiety rather than intention. That the house should stay in steady hands, and that he believed mine were steady. He also wrote, in the last paragraph, that he loved us both the same, Vanessa and me, but that loving people the same did not always mean treating them identically. That was his phrase, treating them identically. I read it 3 times standing in his study, with the smell of his desk, cedar and old paper, and the faint trace of the coffee he drank every morning, still in the air. I did not tell my mother about the letter. I kept it in the walnut box and put the walnut box on the highest shelf of my closet at my apartment across town. What my father did not anticipate was that Barbara Marsh had already located his estate attorney before the ink was dry on the death certificate. What he could not have predicted was that she would find a way to tie up the joint ownership in paperwork for the better part of a year. Every refinancing suggestion, every equity conversation, every decision about the property routed entirely through her, with my name attached only when the law specifically required it. I didn't understand what was happening. Not fully, not yet. I was 22 and grieving, and still trying to make rent on a social work assistant salary of $31,000 a year. I signed what my mother told me to sign. I trusted that she was navigating something complicated on behalf of us both. She was. Just not the way I understood. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you something about what Barbara Marsh was like, because it matters for the rest of this story. She was not a loud woman. She did not rage, she did not throw things or scream or make scenes in restaurants. What she did instead was talk. She could talk in circles around any situation until the situation looked like the one she needed it to look like. She had the specific skill of making her preferences sound like common sense and her demands sound like generosity. She could frame taking something from you as doing something for you, and she could do it so smoothly that you'd find yourself thanking her afterward. I grew up watching her do this to my father. He was a gentleman who wanted peace in his home, and she knew it, and she used it. Not cruelly, not deliberately, not in any way she would ever have recognized in herself, but she used it. Every negotiation in our house ended in her favor, not because she fought hardest, but because she talked longest, and my father was tired. I watched this my whole childhood, and somehow, when it was my turn to sit across the table from her, I still wasn't ready. There is also something I need to tell you about the way Barbara Marsh treated Vanessa versus the way she treated me, because this shaped everything that followed, and I think it is important to name it plainly. Vanessa was beautiful in the way my mother understood beauty, small and fair-haired and gentle-looking, with a laugh that carried across a room, and the particular quality of making people feel, when she turned her attention on them, that they were the most interesting person present. My mother adored this about her. She talked about Vanessa's laugh at dinner parties. She pointed out Vanessa's grades, Vanessa's achievements, Vanessa's friends. She bought Vanessa the better coat and the better birthday present, and arranged her schedule around Vanessa's piano recitals with an enthusiasm she had never quite managed for my soccer games, though she attended those too, always slightly late, always leaving slightly early, always with the particular expression of a person completing an obligation. I am not telling you this as a grievance. I processed it with Dr. Lim over many months, and I understand it with some complexity now. My mother had her own wounds, her own story, her own reasons for the shape of her love, and I am not here to litigate those. I am telling you because you need to understand the architecture, the specific way the house was built, to understand how 11 years could pass before I saw clearly what was happening to me. The architecture was this. Vanessa was the one who mattered, and I was the one who was useful. Both of us were loved. Only one of us was used. By 2011, I had moved into the house. My mother had suggested it. She said it made financial sense. I would save on rent, I could help with the utilities, and since I co-owned the property, wasn't I practically living somewhere beneath my rights by renting a 1-bedroom across town? She said this over the phone in the particular tone she used when a thing was already decided. It was framed as generosity. It was a lock. I understand that now. At the time, I told myself I was being practical. I gave notice on my apartment, packed everything I owned into 11 boxes and a borrowed pickup truck, and moved into the second bedroom of the house on Clover Hill Drive. My old childhood bedroom. The one with the window that looked out over the backyard and the oak tree that had the rope swing on it until I was 12. The utilities were put in my name. My mother explained that this was the sensible arrangement, since I was co-owner of the property, and therefore it made administrative sense for the accounts to reflect that. The secondary credit card tied to the household account, opened to handle unexpected repairs, was in my name. I signed the application on a Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table. My mother poured 2 glasses of iced tea, and we talked about what color to repaint the downstairs bathroom while I signed. When the HVAC system failed in January of 2012, the $7,400 loan to replace it was in my name, though I never saw the application until much later. "You were at work," my mother said when I asked her to walk me through the paperwork. "It was an emergency. The temperature inside was 41 degrees. I signed for you. It's fine. It all comes back to the house anyway, and you own the house." I was 25. I filed this away. I told myself it was a miscommunication. I told myself the next time something like this came up, I would ask to be included in the process from the beginning. I made a mental note, and I did not write it down anywhere, and I let it go, because letting things go was the path of least resistance in that house, and I had been walking that path for 22 years before I even moved back in. Vanessa, during all of this, was living in a renovated apartment in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus, on what our mother called a transitional stipend, a phrase I later learned meant Barbara was pulling $1,100 a month out of the household equity line of credit. The equity line of credit that was in my name. Vanessa was transitioning, my mother explained, from her post-college situation into something more stable. The apartment was a stepping stone. The stipend was temporary. Both of these things were still true 4 years later. Vanessa was working part-time at a gallery and dating a man named Todd, who drove a new car Barbara had co-signed without telling me. She had her nails done every 2 weeks at a salon on 4th Street. She went to Spain for 10 days in the summer of 2013 with Todd, and when she came back, she had a tan and a collection of painted ceramic tiles she'd bought in a market in Barcelona, and my mother hung them in the kitchen of the house on Clover Hill Drive as though they were heirlooms. I mention this not to be small about it. I genuinely did not resent Vanessa her life. Not at first. Not in the simple way that resentment usually works. What I felt was something stranger and quieter than resentment. It was more like looking at a painting and slowly realizing the perspective was off. Something in the composition that didn't add up. The more I stood back and looked at the whole picture, Vanessa's apartment, Vanessa's stipend, Vanessa's Spain trip, the tiles on the kitchen wall, all of it funded from an account bearing my name, the more I felt the particular vertigo of a person who has been looking at something familiar for so long that they forgot to actually see it. The golden one, and the house one, the favored one, and the useful one. I did not see myself clearly until 2014. That was the year I met Marcus. Marcus Osei was a structural engineer. Yes, the same profession as my father, which I noticed and did not say out loud for months because it felt like information that was too loaded to hand over too early. He was 31, calm in a way that felt earned rather than performed, and he had the specific quality of paying attention to things that other people let slide. He noticed that I flinched slightly whenever my phone rang and my mother's name came up on the screen. He noticed that I sometimes couldn't account for where an entire Saturday afternoon had gone, that I would arrive somewhere having spent 3 hours doing things my mother needed done, and not quite be able to explain how it had happened. He noticed that I used the phrase, "I need to check with Barbara first," more than was normal for a 27-year-old woman discussing her own weekend plans, her own free time, her own life. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just paid attention. We had been together for about 8 months when he asked me, quietly, over dinner one evening at the kitchen table in Barbara's house, Del, do you know what's on your credit report? I did not. We pulled it up together that night, sitting side by side on the couch with his laptop balanced on the coffee table. He didn't make it a confrontation. He didn't make it a lesson. He just sat next to me with his shoulder against mine, and we looked at it together. The HVAC loan from 2012. A second personal loan from 2013, $14,200, that I had no memory of whatsoever. A revolving credit balance of $22,000 on the household card that I had believed, based on what my mother had told me, hovered somewhere around $4,000. And a note from a collections agency about an account 3 months past due that I had never seen opened, attached to a mailing address that was a P.O. box in a zip code I didn't recognize. I sat with that screen for a long time. Marcus held my hand and did not speak. He understood, I think, that this was a moment that needed to be absorbed rather than discussed, that the facts had to settle into me before anything else could happen. She told me she was handling it, I finally said. I know, he said. I want to be honest about what happened next because it is not the heroic version of events, and I think the honest version is more useful than the heroic one. I did not call a lawyer. I did not confront my mother. I did not change the locks or freeze my credit or file a police report. I did not do any of the things that make for a clean, satisfying narrative about a person who knew exactly what to do. I went to my mother. I asked her, as calmly as I could, to explain the accounts I hadn't recognized. She cried. Real tears. I want to be clear about that, because I spent a long time afterward trying to decide if they were real, and I believe they were. She talked about my father's death, and about being alone in a way she hadn't anticipated, and about Vanessa's instability, which was the first time she had described Vanessa as anything other than thriving, which I noted somewhere in the back of my mind and did not address. She talked about the way the bills had compounded after the furnace, and how she had meant to sit down with me and go through everything properly. It was just never the right moment. And anyway, wasn't I overreacting slightly given that it all lived inside the house we both owned, and the house was an asset that was still appreciating? She used the word overreacting twice. I believe I nodded. I believe I said something like, okay, let's just be more careful going forward. I stayed for dinner. I helped clear the table. I drove home to Marcus's apartment. I had been staying there more often than not by then, though I hadn't said so explicitly to my mother, and I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a while. Marcus came and sat next to me. He said, I need to know if you understand what happened. I told him I did. He said, I need to know if you're going to do something about it. I told him I would. Okay, he said, and he didn't push further. He just believed me, which was its own kind of weight. That was the beginning of the quiet part. I opened a personal savings account the following week at a credit union on the other side of Columbus, not the bank where my mother had always handled the family finances, not at any institution she had a relationship with, not anywhere she might have occasion to walk in and see my name on a form. I deposited a fixed amount from every paycheck. I told no one. I started requesting copies of documents, not all at once, slowly, methodically, so that no single request looked like the beginning of something. I called the HVAC company in Westerville and asked for copies of the financing paperwork from their January 2012 emergency repair. I told them I was reorganizing my files. They mailed it to my work address. I called the bank that held the personal loan from 2013 and asked them to send me originals. I called the collections agency about the P.O. box account and explained that I had moved and had not been receiving correspondence, and could they please resend? They could. Every piece of paper went into a folder. The folders went into a box. The box went under the bed in the spare room at Marcus's apartment, inside a larger box that was labeled, in Marcus's handwriting, Structural Load Calculations, Archive, because no one in the world was going to go looking through Marcus's engineering files. I also, during this period, made an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Sandra Lim, and her office was on the 4th floor of a building near Ohio State's campus. and the first thing I said to her when I sat down was, "I think my mother has been using my credit for years, and I don't know what to do, and I also don't know if I'm making this into something bigger than it is." She looked at me for a moment. She said, "Tell me what you know." I told her. I brought the folder to the third session. She referred me to a financial counselor, and later to Cecile Waters. I want to say something about those months, late 2014 through 2015, because I think this is the part people skip over when they tell stories like mine. The long middle, where nothing dramatic happens, where you just quietly build, where you go to work and come home and eat dinner and watch television and have normal conversations with your mother on Sundays about nothing, while simultaneously compiling a documented record of what she has been doing to you. It requires a particular kind of patience that I do not think I had naturally. I think I grew it in that period. I had to learn to live in two registers at once: the surface life, which was ordinary and unremarkable, and the underneath life, which was methodical and slow and deeply serious. I got very good at it, better than I would have liked. I also, during this period, began to understand my own history differently. I went back through what I could reconstruct: the HVAC loan, the personal loan, the equity draws for Vanessa's stipend, and I mapped them onto a timeline: years, amounts, dates. The picture that emerged was not of a chaotic or impulsive person making bad decisions under pressure. The picture was of someone systematic, someone who had identified a resource and developed a relationship with it over time. That resource was my name, and the relationship had been cultivated long before the $90,000, long before the second loan, probably long before I moved back into the house. The trust my father had placed in me had, without my noticing, been redirected, used as cover. That understanding was the thing that changed everything for me. Not the anger, though I had that too, in quiet moments, in the car sometimes, where I could let it be what it was without performing anything. What changed me was the clarity, the specific, documented, inarguable clarity that came from looking at a timeline with real dates and real numbers, and seeing at last the shape of what had been done. In the spring of 2015, I also quietly began the process of detangling my name from the household accounts, where I legally could. One at a time, slowly. Each change small enough to be explainable as a practical matter if questioned. I opened a separate utility account at my official address, Marcus's apartment by then, in all but formal registration, and began paying those bills separately, establishing a paper trail that showed where I actually lived. This became important later. Marcus and I got engaged on a Saturday in October 2016, quietly, at home, with no audience. He had found a ring at an estate sale the previous spring, a vintage setting with a small oval sapphire, not what I would have designed, and exactly what I would have chosen. We sat on the couch for a long time afterward, not saying very much, just sitting with it. Then we opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving and ordered pizza. And that was the celebration. We told people slowly. We told my mother last. Not strategically, or not only strategically, but because by the time we were ready to tell her, I had already received the phone call from Priya, and everything had shifted. Let me tell you about that phone call. Priya Subramanian and I had met in September of 2003 in a cinder block dormitory room at Ohio State, where we had both been assigned to the last double on the third floor of Morrill Tower. She was studying finance. I was studying social work. We were not obvious friends. She was organized where I was scattered, structured where I was instinctive, meticulous about money in a way that I found slightly alarming until I understood that it came from necessity rather than personality. She was the first person in her family to attend college, and she tracked every dollar because she had to. We became close the way people do when proximity and honesty and two very different kinds of hard work end up in the same small room for long enough. She had gone on to work in banking after graduation. Branch management first, then commercial lending, And by 2016, she was a senior loan officer at the Westerville branch of a regional bank, the bank where my mother had done her banking for 30 years. The bank where, as I would come to understand, Barbara Marsh was known by name and trusted implicitly. Priya called me from a blocked number on the evening of September 14th, 2016. I was in Nashville. I was at a conference dinner at a hotel restaurant on 2nd Avenue, and my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, and I stepped outside to take the call because blocked numbers made me nervous. She said she could not tell me everything. She was very clear about that, and I understood it. She was a professional with compliance obligations and a job she had worked very hard for, and she was already doing something she probably shouldn't have been doing by calling me at all. She said, "Del, I need you to check your accounts. The ones associated with the Clover Hill Drive property specifically. Something went through here today with your name on it, and She stopped. I heard her exhale. She said, "Just check everything, please. I mean everything. Go back a year." Then she said she had to go, and she hung up. I stood outside that restaurant for about 4 minutes in the Nashville evening. It was still warm, still summer warm at 7 o'clock, and there were people on the sidewalk and music coming from somewhere down the block, and I thought about what she had said. Something went through with your name on it. I turned it over. I put my phone back in my pocket. I went back inside and finished dinner and said the right things to the right people, and I did not sleep well that night. When I got home to Columbus 2 days later, I started checking. The $90,000 home equity loan did not show up on any statement delivered to the Clover Hill Drive address because my mother had arranged for the account statements to go to a P.O. box I didn't know existed, a box she had apparently opened in both our names with documentation I was never shown. I had to request account history directly from the bank's lending department, in writing, with identification, and even then there was a delay while they verified my standing as a co-owner of the collateral property. I found it on October 9th, 2016. A home equity loan in the amount of $90,000, opened September 14th, 2016, secured against my co-owned interest in the property at Clover Hill Drive. Borrower, Delia Lynn Marsh. Signed and notarized. I looked at that document for a long time. Then I put it in the box under the bed, and I called Cecile Waters. Cecile was 48 years old, with an office on Broad Street and a reputation for financial fraud cases that Priya's own attorney sister had described to Priya once as the kind of lawyer you want on your side and would never want across from you. She wore reading glasses on a chain and kept a ceramic mug on her desk that said Exhibit A. When I walked into her office on a Tuesday afternoon and explained my situation, she listened without interruption for 45 minutes. She did not take notes. She simply listened, watching me with the focused attention of a person filing everything away. When I finished, she said, "How organized is your documentation?" I handed her the first folder. She looked at the tabs. She looked at me. She said, "Okay, here is what we are going to do. You are not going to move. You are not going to confront anyone. You are not going to change any accounts, close any accounts, or give any indication that anything has changed. You are going to continue exactly as you have been. And you are going to let me work." I said, "For how long?" She said, "Until we're ready." I drove home. I made dinner. I sat across from my mother that evening and discussed whether the gutters needed cleaning before the first frost. If you are Team Delia right now, if you've been holding your breath for the last several minutes, drop it in the comments. I know this part of the story is hard to sit with. It was hard to live in. But I want you to stay with me because we are getting close to the part where everything turns. Here's what the $90,000 had been used for, as Cecile and the bank's fraud investigator pieced together over the following months, transaction by transaction, receipt by receipt. $31,000 had gone to retire several debts on accounts that were in my mother's name only. Store cards, a personal line of credit, balances she had accumulated over the preceding 3 years that she apparently could no longer service. These were debts my mother had not mentioned to me, not once. $22,000 had been transferred in 3 separate installments, spaced 6 weeks apart, to a checking account in Vanessa's name. The transfers were coded in the memo field as family support. There was no loan agreement. There was no repayment schedule. There was no documentation of any kind. The remaining $37,000 had been paid to a contractor named Dale Purvis of Purvis General Construction in Dublin, Ohio, who had spent October and November of 2016 converting the basement of the Clover Hill Drive property into what my mother described to the neighbors as a proper family suite. New drywall, new flooring, a small kitchenette, a full bathroom, recessed lighting. For Vanessa. My sister had been planning to move home, into the house I co-owned, into a suite funded by a loan bearing my signature, a signature I did not write, on a document I did not see, on a day I was 400 miles away at a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, with my registration badge still pinned to my lanyard and my hotel receipts tucked into my wallet, and my name on the attendee list of the Ohio Social Work Association, which posts those lists publicly on its website for the year following the event. That last detail mattered enormously. Priya had looked up the attendee list in September, the same week the loan application came through. She had printed it. She had placed it in my file with a sticky note in her handwriting that said she wasn't here. That note was part of a formal evidentiary record by the time March arrived. Now, let me take you back to that kitchen. That Tuesday morning, 11 days before closing. I came downstairs because my mother had texted me the night before, "Come down when you're up. Need to talk about the house." I had read that text in bed at Marcus's apartment, and I had shown it to Marcus, and we had looked at each other in the specific way we had developed over the preceding months for exactly this kind of thing. He had squeezed my hand once. I had set the phone face down on the nightstand and gone to sleep. I drove to Clover Hill Drive at 9 in the morning. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and the particular cleaning product my mother had used on the counters my whole life, a lemon-scented spray that I will never be able to smell without feeling something complicated. She was already sitting at the table. The manila folder was already there. She slid it across to me. "You already signed this," she said, "whether you remember it or not." Her voice was steady. She had prepared this. She had thought through what she was going to say and how she was going to say it, and she had decided that confidence was the posture, that if she presented the forgery as a settled fact, as something I might have simply forgotten, there would be a version of me who would nod and accept that framing, because there had always been a version of me who did. She was not wrong that such a version had existed. She had simply not accounted for what I had been doing for the past 5 months. I looked at the signature on page 3. I looked at the date. I set my coffee mug down on the table, and I folded my hands in my lap, and I looked at my mother. "Okay," I said. She waited. She was waiting for the tears or the argument or the negotiation, for some opening she could get in front of, some emotional weather she could redirect. She was waiting for the version of me she had always managed. "We should talk about the Calumet house," she said, when I didn't give her anything. "Because I think you need to understand that the equity situation on this property is more complicated than you've been led to believe. And before you and Marcus do something you can't undo..." "I'll be home for dinner," I said. I picked up my coffee. I stood up. I carried the mug to the sink, rinsed it, set it on the drying rack. I picked up my keys from the counter. I did not look at her again. I drove straight to Cecile's office. We had a call scheduled for that afternoon anyway, and I arrived 2 hours early and sat in the waiting area with a magazine I did not read. When Cecile came out to get me, she took one look at my face and said, "She moved up the timeline, didn't she?" "She showed me the folder," I said. Cecile nodded once. She said, "Good. That's actually good. It means she's nervous." She was nervous because Jeff from the mortgage company had called Marcus 4 days earlier. The lien on Clover Hill Drive, generated by the fraudulent home equity loan, had shown up in the title search for the Calumet Avenue purchase. Jeff had flagged it, Marcus had told me, I had told Cecile, and Cecile had accelerated everything. We had 11 days. Cecile had been building the case since October. She had filed a formal fraud complaint with the bank in late October, which triggered the bank's own internal investigation, a parallel process running alongside ours that Cecile had carefully coordinated with the bank's fraud team without tipping off anyone at the branch level who might inadvertently alert my mother. Priya had given a recorded compliance statement in November, carefully worded within the limits of what her legal team permitted, confirming the specific irregularities in the application, the P.O. box associated with the account, the notary stamp from a UPS store in Delaware County that was not near the borrower's address or workplace, and the detail Priya had flagged from the beginning, the conference registration. Cecile had also contacted Dale Purvis in December. He had been easy to find and easier to talk to than anyone expected. He was a straightforward man who had done a straightforward job, and he was disturbed to learn there was any legal question about it. He produced a signed contract, signed by Barbara Marsh, with Barbara Marsh's own signature, not mine, and a long thread of text messages between himself and Barbara, directing the basement renovation work, the materials, the payment schedule, the finish dates. He had photographs of the work in progress. He had receipts. He provided everything, without hesitation, because he had done nothing wrong, and he knew it. The closing on the Calumet Avenue house was set for March 25th. Cecile's court petition to void the fraudulent home equity loan, discharge the lien it had placed on the Clover Hill Drive property, and refer the matter to the County Financial Crimes Unit for criminal prosecution of Barbara Marsh was filed on March 20th. On March 22nd, at 2:15 in the afternoon, 2 investigators from the County Financial Crimes Unit knocked on the door of the house on Clover Hill Drive. I was not home. I was at a cafe on High Street with Marcus and Cecile, at a round table near the window with 3 cups of coffee none of us were really drinking, watching the clock on Marcus's phone. At 2:22, Cecile's contact at the county sent a text that said, "Contact made." I looked out the window at High Street, at the people walking past, not knowing anything, carrying on with their ordinary Fridays. I thought about the kitchen on Clover Hill Drive and the lemon spray and the manila folder and my mother's voice saying, "You already signed this, whether you remember it or not." I thought about the conference lanyard still in the bottom of my tote bag. I thought about Priya, standing outside some room she couldn't leave, making a phone call she wasn't supposed to make, because she knew me and she paid attention. Marcus put his hand over mine on the table. "How are you doing?" he said. "Ask me in 3 days," I said. Here is what I was told happened at the house on Clover Hill Drive, pieced together from the investigator's report and from the account of Dorothy Huang, a retired middle school science teacher who had lived across the street for 22 years and who turned out to have been observing the Marsh household with a quiet attentiveness that would have impressed Cecile. My mother answered the door in a cream-colored cardigan. She smiled at the investigators the way she smiled at anyone she was assessing, warmly, openly, with the particular expression that said, "I am a reasonable person, and whatever this is, we can sort it out." She invited them in. She offered them coffee. They declined. The investigators presented their documentation. They were professional and unhurried. My mother made an initial attempt to frame the situation as a family misunderstanding. Her daughter had been aware of the loan, the family finances were complicated, her husband had passed some years ago, and the estate matters had never been fully untangled. She had always intended to sit down properly and go through everything with Delia when the moment was right. She used the word complicated 4 times in the first 6 minutes. Dorothy, who had a clear sightline through my mother's front window from her own living room armchair, counted. One of the investigators asked whether Vanessa Marsh was present in the home. My mother said Vanessa was visiting a friend. The investigator said that was fine. They had separate documentation for Vanessa and would make appropriate arrangements. There was a pause. My mother sat down on the couch. Dorothy said the cream cardigan didn't move for a long time after that. She said my mother sat very still with her hands in her lap, looking at the floor, and that was different from the Barbara Marsh Dorothy had watched for 22 years, because the Barbara Marsh she knew never sat still and never looked at the floor. Dorothy said she turned off her television and sat with that image for a while before she went to make dinner. The closing on Calumet Avenue happened on the 25th, 3 days later, as scheduled. The lien had been formally flagged and disputed. Cecile had communicated directly with the title company through the weekend to ensure the documentation was in order. There was a 40-minute delay while a final confirmation came through from the bank's fraud team. We sat in the closing attorney's office, Marcus and I, and waited. Jeff from the mortgage company sat across from us and told us about a closing he'd once attended that had taken 4 hours because of a misfiled deed, and I think he was trying to be comforting, and it worked slightly. The confirmation came through. The paperwork was placed in front of me. I signed my real name to every page, slowly, deliberately, in my actual handwriting, which is a loose, left-leaning print that has been the same since I was 16 years old. I have never been particularly proud of my handwriting, but I was proud of it that afternoon. When the notary slid the final page across the table and I set the pen down after the last signature, I just looked at it for a moment. My name, written by my hand, on something that was mine, that no one else had touched. Marcus put his hand over mine on the table. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We drove to the house on Calumet Avenue, our house, a pale yellow Craftsman with a covered porch and a slightly uneven front walkway, and a backyard with 2 old apple trees in it. And we stood in the driveway with the keys in my hand for about 30 seconds. Then I unlocked the front door, and we went in, and we stood in the empty living room in the late afternoon light, and we cried for about 4 minutes. Just 4 minutes. Then we ordered Thai food and ate it on the floor, and Marcus said we should get a cat, and I said we were absolutely getting a cat. And that was the first evening in our house. The fallout unfolded over the weeks that followed, in the way these things always do. Not in one clean revelation, but in a series of concrete, documented, sequential events, each one producing paperwork. Barbara Marsh was formally charged with forgery, identity theft, and fraudulent use of a financial instrument. Cecile pursued civil action in parallel with the criminal proceedings. The $90,000 home equity loan was voided in full. The lien was discharged. The $37,000 paid to Dale Purvis for the basement renovation, the family suite that was meant for Vanessa, that was never occupied by anyone, was included in the civil damages calculation. Dale Purvis submitted an invoice to the estate for the fair market value of the improvements. The irony of this was not lost on me. The basement renovation that was supposed to bring Vanessa home permanently added documented value to the property that I then received my legal share of when the house sold. I did not plan this. I simply let the paperwork do what paperwork does. Vanessa was charged separately with receiving funds from a fraudulent transaction. She hired her own attorney, a man who specialized in financial cases, and who apparently advised her quickly and firmly that cooperation was the correct strategy. She cooperated. She gave a full statement. Her charge was reduced. She received probation and a restitution obligation. She and I have not spoken since March. I don't say that with anger or with any desire to dramatize it. I say it the way you say a window is closed, as a description of the current state, not a condemnation. She made choices. The choices had consequences. I have no interest in relitigating them. My mother hired a defense attorney and spent 8 months navigating the criminal process. She entered a guilty plea on 2 of the 4 charges, forgery and fraudulent use of a financial instrument, in exchange for the dismissal of the other 2. She was sentenced to 36 months of supervised probation, mandatory restitution payments, and a financial counseling requirement. She did not go to prison. I won't pretend that sits easily with me. Not completely. When I sat with Cecile after the sentencing and she asked me how I felt, I said, I don't know yet. And she said that was the honest answer. The civil judgment carries its own weight, and the restitution is ongoing, and the criminal record is permanent. I have made my peace with the shape of the outcome, even if I didn't design every dimension of it. The house on Clover Hill Drive was listed in September and sold in November. Clean title, documented history, a young couple who were, I was told, planning to repaint the kitchen and update the bathrooms. I hope they kept the backyard oak tree. It was a good tree. As co-owner of the property, I received my legal share of the sale proceeds. I put it toward the principal on the Calumet Avenue mortgage. The night the wire transfer confirmed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and looked at the bank notification on my phone for a while. Then I put the phone down and I went to find Marcus. And I told him we should celebrate. And we walked to the Italian place on Calumet that we'd been meaning to try since we moved in. And it was very good and slightly too expensive, and we didn't care. It is now 14 months since all of that. I am sitting in the kitchen of the Calumet Avenue house, our house, on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee. The walls are the color Marcus picked, a dusty sage that looked ridiculous on the paint sample strip and is perfect on an actual wall, which I now acknowledge freely. There are plants on the windowsill. We have established that I can keep a pothos alive and Marcus can keep a fiddle leaf fig alive, and we are both very proud of this. The cat we adopted in January, a gray tabby from the Franklin County shelter, 8 months old, deeply opinionated about everything, is asleep on a pile of Marcus's technical drawings on the kitchen table. His name is Gerald, because what else would we have named him? My credit score is 776. It took 3 years to rebuild, and I am not cavalier about it. My savings account has a number in it that would have seemed like a fantasy to the version of me who was 25 and signing things at a kitchen table and telling herself it was a miscommunication. I work at a family advocacy nonprofit now. I started there about 18 months ago. The work is specific. I help individuals and families untangle financial situations that were made complicated by someone they trusted. A parent, a sibling, a spouse, a business partner. Someone who had access and used it without permission. I sit with people in the way that Cecile once sat with me, and I hand them a notepad, and I say, start with what you know, and we will find the paper. The paper is almost always there. It takes time to find, and it is not always sufficient by itself, but it is almost always there. I think about my father in this work sometimes, about the letter in the walnut box, about the particular trust he placed in steady hands, and about what it took to make mine steady. Priya came to our housewarming in May, a Saturday afternoon, 20-some people in the backyard with the apple trees, Marcus's friends from work and my friends from the nonprofit, and Priya with a bottle of good wine she'd carried on the train from Columbus. She stood in the kitchen and looked around at everything, at the sage walls and the plants, and Gerald the cat investigating her shoes with extreme suspicion. And she said, "Dell, you did this. Not we. Not this happened to you. You did this." I thought about the phone call she had made from a blocked number, the 4 minutes she had spent outside a Nashville restaurant, the sticky note she had placed in a file that said, in her careful handwriting, she wasn't here. I said, "We did this." She shook her head. "You did the work," she said. "I just handed you the first piece of paper." Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is one person who pays attention, who notices the detail that doesn't fit and decides it matters. Who makes the call they're not supposed to make because the alternative is worse? I think about that a lot. I try to be that person for the people who sit across from me at the nonprofit. The walnut box from my father's desk is on the shelf in our hallway, between a small succulent Marcus grew from a cutting and a photograph of the two of us at Marcus's sister's wedding in Accra, the summer after we closed on this house. The letter is still inside. I read it sometimes, not often, not as a ritual, just occasionally, when I need the specific reminder it contains. He wrote that the house should stay in steady hands. He wrote that he loved us both the same, and that loving people the same did not always mean treating them identically. I think about that second sentence more than the first. I think about what it means to love someone and still require something of them. To trust them precisely because you know what they're capable of. To hand something over not as a gift, but as a bet. I think, on balance, he won his bet. If this story found you somewhere it needed to, if you've ever had your name used without your permission, your trust mistaken for compliance, your silence read as consent, then you already know what this story is really about. It isn't about the $90,000. Not really. It's about the 11 years before the $90,000. The slow accumulation of small permissions you never actually gave. The way a person can spend a decade handing themselves over in increments so small that no single one feels like a crisis, and then look up one morning and realize how far from themselves they have drifted. The thing no one told me about documentation, and I wish someone had, earlier, much earlier, is that it is not just a legal instrument. It is an act of insisting that your experience happened, that the dates are real, that you were where you say you were, that your signature means something, and that meaning belongs to you. No one can take that from you once you understand it. Not a folder slid across a table, not a voice as flat as a dial tone, not someone who has been telling you in 100 small ways for a decade that your name is theirs to use. Your name is yours. Share the story if it meant something to you. Subscribe if you want to stay. There are more stories coming, every one of them earned, every one of them ending in the same place. The quiet, improbable, stubbornly ordinary life that the people who underestimated you never thought you'd get to have. I'll see you in the next one.